Hello there, lovely people, it's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today it is time for us to review Panzer Dragoon Remake on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the excellent Chris Scullion and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling, let's dive right into things. When Nintendo revealed during its E3 2019 presentation that a remake of Panzer Dragoon was coming to the Switch, we were pleasantly surprised, myself included. I was very excited. Then when a Nintendo Direct Mini confirmed that the game was available to buy immediately, we were once again delighted by the unexpected news. Now that we've played it, however, we're slightly less overjoyed, but we are grateful it exists. For those unfamiliar with the Sega Saturn original, Panzer Dragoon casts you as Kiel, a hunter who finds himself caught up in an adventure when he witnessed two dragon-riding warriors fighting each other in a big dragony fighty mess. When one is fatally wounded, he asks you to take his dragon and stop the other one from reaching the ominous Black Tower. Cue 6 stages of on-rails shooting action atop your new dragon pal on an adventure that takes roughly an hour to beat, not taking deaths and continues into account, of course. This may seem a little bit on the short side, and it is. The main gimmick in Panzer Dragoon that separates it from other on-rails flight combat games like Star Fox is the ability to press the shoulder buttons to rotate the camera 90 degrees either way. Enemies can approach you from the sides and the rear, so you need to keep an eye on your radar and adjust your view accordingly. Combat consists of two types of shot, a standard blast by tapping the shot button, and a far more effective homing shot that lets you lock onto multiple lovely targets by holding down the button before unleashing blue ribbons of hell onto them by letting it go. Whilst most enemies are more effectively defeated by the homing shot, others, and most types of missile, can only be taken out with the standard gun, so learning which weapon to use and when is absolutely essential. This Switch remake has two control systems to choose from as well, a classic configuration that matches the originals relatively closely, and the new modern option. Classic will, unsurprisingly, be much more familiar to fans of the original, with players able to use either the left stick or the D-pad to move and aim at the same time, and if you really want, you can even have inverted aiming, although it is turned off by default. Modern, meanwhile, adds a twin stick system which lets you move with the left stick and aim your crosshair with the right one, as you would probably expect to do in a modern game. Naturally, this allows you to stay in one place whilst aiming, which is not something that was possible in the original version of this game, which is useful because it makes it less likely that you're going to fly directly into enemy fire when you're trying to line up that perfect shot. Having both options is welcome, but each has their own issues. As explained previously, the classic controls make it impossible to move and aim in separate directions, whereas the modern version assigns shots to the ZL and ZR buttons. No big deal when using a Pro Controller, but can be uncomfortable depending on your hand's size and shape when playing in handheld mode due to the way that you've got to try and get both ZL and ZR, and both left stick and right stick. Yeah, I mean, if you got a grip, you'll be alright, but if you're not, it might not be that comfortable. Whichever you choose, aiming will require an adjustment period. As in the original, your aiming reticule consists of a line of boxes that go off into the distance. This is designed to make it easier to aim in 3 dimensions, but it's a little bit hit and miss in practice, and the analog controls are quite stiff. A patch is coming that will apparently add gyro controls, which we are more than up for in theory, but we will need to see how that plays out in practice. It's also significantly slower to rotate the camera here than it was in the original. In the past, you could zip from the front view to the side views and the rear view in a fairly zippy fashion, but this time it does seem to just take a little bit longer. In moments when you're taking shots from enemies in all angles, it can sometimes feel a little bit sluggish and like you're struggling to keep up with the pace. On top of all of this, there's a weird visual quirk in which your aiming reticule actually appears on top of your character. But on the Saturn, the reticule was always in front of the character, which made sense. You're playing as them and you're controlling their aim. By placing the cursor on top of the character, it instead feels like you're controlling someone else who's sat behind them, which I suppose you are, but even so. It isn't a massive deal in the grand scheme of things, but it does affect the immersion a little for those who are used to the original's aiming system. The visuals are somewhat of a mixed bag as well. I mean, there's no denying that the game is a significant improvement over the original. I mean, I'm sure if you've even seen the Sega Saturn release, you'll be able to tell that without us saying so. That being said, we aren't exactly looking at a Link's Awakening moment here. Taken on its own merits, it's still a fairly basic looking game with low poly models, an underwhelming frame rate, and some admittedly rough scenery, especially in handheld mode. One area that can't be questioned, however, is the music. The Saturn version's incredible orchestral soundtrack is here in all its glory, and it sounds just as phenomenal as it did 25 years ago. There's an optional remixed soundtrack coming in another patch for anyone who's looking for something new to go with the updated graphics, but again, patches, we can't really pass any judgment on it because it ain't here. Panzer Dragoon Remake is an interesting take on a classic that may ultimately only appeal to some fans. It is far too short for the price, meaning that anyone who doesn't have any interest in its legacy may well not be able to see past the fact that they're paying about $25 for a game that's over in an hour or maybe two. It's very much aimed at those with a love of the original game then, or at least a curious interest as to why it's considered such a classic. The various control and design updates are likely to divide the diehards, but it's still Panzer Dragoon at its core, and with the same studio also planning to also remake the vastly superior Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei, consider us cautiously optimistic for that one. Panzer Dragoon Remake is a decent take on an all-time classic that goes some way to modernizing it, but doesn't quite nail the landing. Awkward controls and a visual style that's a clear improvement but could still look much better results in a game that's mainly for fans of the original who are curious to see how the game would look with a new lick of paint. Oh, blimey, it's time for Alex's personal thoughts. Yeah, so I never actually played the original Panzer Dragoon. I was a big fan of Panzer Dragoon Auto, and I don't know why, I've got this vague memory of playing one in an arcade, maybe? I mean, I've barely been to arcades, but I have. So I'd never played the original version of the first game, which is what we've got here. But you know, I must admit, I've got to say, I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest. Part of it was me setting myself up. I think I set my expectations too high, but also there are loads of hangovers from the old days, which, I mean, you might say are almost charming in a way, and some of them genuinely are, like the mad fonts and the weird sort of like 3D effect and the bevel put in everything. But at the same time, there are some things like you can't even change your you can't even change your control scheme mid-game. You've got to actually lose all your progress in that level, and then come back, and you know, you've got to start the episode again, which I just think is silly. And you know, it's 2020. I can't help but feel that there are some things that were, you know, they were a factor in the past, but maybe they should be left there. There's also other things which may well tie into the difficulty of the original game, I don't know, and so to change it would make it, you know, completely broken. But what was really annoying for me is the fact that you can't move when you're looking at the side or looking at the back of you, rather than just looking forward. Even with the new controls, you can't move around, you can't dodge any attacks, you've got to shoot them, and I don't know whether it's just the way that the sticks have been calibrated, but it doesn't feel very natural. I am really looking forward to the motion control updates when they come, because that is going to make a tremendous difference to this game. It may make it too easy, I don't know, maybe it'll just give people PTSD to Star Fox Zero, I don't know. But I did have fun with it. The intro cutscene in particular was really funky. I mean, it almost looks like it's been done on a budget, and maybe that is the case, but I can't help but feel that maybe it's trying to harken back to the original days. But at the same time, like the original intro cutscene, which I did look up as well, just to make sure that it wasn't just old, but there is a bizarre charm to the whole game. The whole thing feels very old, but at the same time, with the new sort of spit and polish that's been put on there, it also doesn't feel entirely new either. It's sitting in a strange sort of place between. I mean, I'm getting some real nostalgia vibes, even though I never played the original, as I've mentioned probably once or twice in this. You know, sort of, there are so many tropes with things like the menus and everything. Reminds me a lot, actually, in terms of the style of menus and things like that to a game called Warbreeds, which I think like me and one other person played, and that other person was my brother. I did definitely enjoy the game, but I think I am of a very particular audience, and at the same time I can't completely overlook its misgivings. It's definitely not bad through and through, but it sort of feels like maybe it could have done with a bit longer in development, or maybe a little bit more injection of modernity, rather than just, you know, really gripping onto the past to a ridiculous degree, unless they were just going to release the original in its original state. I think if you're going to remaster something, you might as well, you know, sort of round off the edges a bit. So that was a bit disappointing, but overall, yeah, it's okay. I had fun.